She was marketed as fertile, but no one believed it or wanted her, until a cowboy proved them wrong. Maggie had always been an optimistic soul, but the world she was born into seemed determined to tear away her joy. She grew up in a small, tight-knit town where everyone knew everyone's business. In such a place, there was little room for privacy, and even less room for being different. The expectations were clear. Get married, have children, and fit into the neat little box of what it meant to be a woman in that town. But Maggie felt like she was constantly trying to fit into a box that never quite seemed to match her. From a young age, Maggie knew there was something about her that made her stand out from the other girls. She wasn't like the others who had beauty that could turn heads or grace that made them the center of attention at every town gathering. Instead, Maggie was quietly intelligent and full of a kindness that radiated when she spoke, but the town didn't seem to value those things. To them, the most important thing for a woman was her ability to bear children. Her value in their eyes rested in her fertility, something Maggie had long suspected she was lacking. It started when she was young, watching her friends get attention from the boys, getting flowers, being wooed and admired. She felt out of place. When she turned 18, many of her friends were already engaged, or at least dating someone seriously. Yet, Maggie found herself alone. Boys were not drawn to her like they were to the other girls. She would watch from the sidelines as they flirted and laughed, while she struggled to understand what was missing in her. She tried to dress like the others, speak like the others, even laugh like them, but it was always as if something was just out of reach. The whispers started when she was about 20. Some of her friends had begun to marry, and the questions started. Why isn't Maggie getting married? Is there something wrong with her? The rumors grew louder, and people started to notice her single status. At first, it was just casual conversations in passing, people wondering aloud why she wasn't settling down. But soon, it became more than that. People started to talk about her as if she were some kind of oddity, something to pity, something to look at with disdain. She's just not made for marriage. Maybe she's barren. No man will ever want her if she can't have children. Those words stung more than any harsh look or dismissive comment. To be dismissed so completely, to be reduced to nothing more than a question mark in the minds of others, left Maggie feeling like she had no value. She knew there were whispers behind her back. She could hear them, though they didn't have the courage to say it to her face. It was a cruel sort of thing to do to someone, define them by something they couldn't control. Her family felt the sting of these comments as well. Her mother, a woman who had once been the heart of the town with her warm smile and charm, now found herself questioning what she could have done differently. Was it something she had done wrong when raising Maggie? Perhaps, she thought, it was her fault for not teaching Maggie how to capture a man's heart the way others had done. But no matter how hard Maggie's mother tried to help her, it was as if Maggie's fate was sealed. The town had spoken, and there was nothing that could be done to change it. Despite her mother's best efforts to arrange a marriage, nothing seemed to work. Men would show interest at first, but once the talk of marriage and children came up, they would quickly pull away. No one wanted a wife who couldn't bear children. It wasn't just the men who were skeptical. The women in the town, those who had married young and had children of their own, didn't know what to make of Maggie. They didn't understand her refusal to settle for someone who wasn't right for her, someone who didn't make her feel alive like her heart had a reason to beat. To them, finding a husband was the goal, having children was the reward. But Maggie had no intention of following their path if it meant giving up her own dreams. It was around this time that the term fertility began to haunt her. It was the word that seemed to follow her wherever she went, used by the matchmakers who couldn't find a man willing to marry her. They'd tell her mother, "She's a nice girl, but..." If she can't bear children, then why bother? The weight of those words felt like a heavy stone lodged in Maggie's chest. She wasn't a woman to be discarded so easily, yet it seemed like no one wanted to give her a chance. At first, Maggie tried to fight back the feelings of worthlessness. She believed that someday, someone would see her for who she really was, someone who deserved love, someone who had so much more to offer than just the ability to have children. But as the years went by, the isolation grew harder to bear. She spent many evenings alone in her room, wondering why it had to be this way. She would write in her journal, her only companion in the quiet nights, about her hopes and dreams, about the kind of life she imagined for herself. But as the town's expectations pressed down on her, it became more and more difficult to keep her spirit alive. She'd hear her mother's voice trying to comfort her, telling her that someday things would change. But deep down, Maggie wasn't sure. Was there really a future for her? Or was she destined to live out her life in the shadow of everyone else's expectations? A woman who was never quite good enough because she wasn't fertile. One day, as she walked to the market to buy some groceries, she overheard a conversation between two women. They were talking about her. One of them said, "She's been marketed as fertile, but no one believes it or wants her. Who could blame them? A woman who can't even bear children is worthless around here." Maggie's heart sank as the words hit her like a cold gust of wind. She didn't even have the courage to confront them. Instead, she kept walking, pretending she hadn't heard them. But in her mind, those words echoed over and over. She felt like a broken puzzle piece that didn't belong anywhere, and the pressure to conform to their expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders. And yet, deep within her, something stirred. Maggie knew she wasn't defined by what others said about her. She knew there had to be more to life than being reduced to one aspect of her being. She had to believe there was someone out there who could see her for who she truly was, someone who could see beyond the cruel whispers of a small town. The story of Maggie's life, full of rejection and doubt, was just beginning to unfold. Little did she know, things were about to change in ways she could never have imagined. But first, Maggie would have to face the hardest challenge of all, finding the strength within herself to believe that she was worthy of more than what the world had decided for her. The days passed in Maggie's small town, each one feeling like the last, as if she were stuck in an endless loop. Every time she walked down the street, she could feel the weight of people's eyes on her. They didn't need to say anything, Maggie could read their expressions. There were whispers, looks of pity, and occasionally judgment. She had become a quiet topic of conversation behind closed doors, the girl who could never be what everyone expected her to be. At family gatherings, Maggie would sit silently, watching her relatives interact. Her cousins were busy with their own children, playing and laughing together. They would ask her when she would settle down, when she would start a family of her own. Each time, Maggie would force a smile and try to deflect their questions with a light-hearted comment. But the truth was, she didn't know. She wasn't sure if she was ever going to find the right person, let alone start a family. She had always dreamed of a life where love wasn't defined by expectations, where a partner could see her for who she really was. But in her town, love was just about being able to bear children. It was as simple and as complicated as that. As the months went by, Maggie's feeling of isolation deepened. The town's matchmaking process seemed like a never-ending cycle. The matchmakers would meet with her mother and suggest different men. "How about him? He's a good man, a little quiet, but he's steady. He could provide well." Her mother, desperate to see Maggie married, would always respond with enthusiasm, "Oh, he's perfect." But the moment Maggie met these men, she knew they weren't right for her. They only saw her as a potential wife, nothing more. They talked about having children, about creating a family, but no one ever spoke to her like she had a personality, a soul, a future beyond being a mother. It frustrated Maggie. Why couldn't anyone see her for who she was? Why couldn't they understand that she had dreams of her own? She was more than just a woman who could bear children. She was kind, intelligent, and had so much to offer. But in a town where the measure of a woman's worth was how quickly she could start a family, Maggie began to feel invisible. Each failed attempt at matchmaking chipped away at her sense of self-worth, leaving her with a deep sense of loneliness. But even in the depths of her despair, Maggie held on to a small hope. She refused to believe that her life had to be this way forever. She couldn't let the town define her. There had to be more to her life than this, more to her existence than being seen as a failed prospect. She spent many evenings by herself, walking along the quiet streets, thinking about what could be. She dreamed of a world where people didn't judge each other based on such shallow expectations. In her dreams, she could feel the freedom of being loved for who she was, not for what she could give. In these quiet moments, Maggie built up her resolve. She promised herself that no matter how long it took, she would find someone who would see her for the person she truly was. But despite her dreams, the reality of her life didn't change. The town's pressure only grew stronger. She started noticing the way people would look at her with pity. "Poor Maggie," they would say. "She'll never get married." It was as if she were a forgotten piece of the puzzle, discarded and overlooked. The more she tried to escape this reality, the more it clung to her. It was as though the weight of everyone's expectations was pulling her under, drowning her in the belief that she wasn't good enough. At family gatherings, it became harder and harder to hide her frustration. Her cousins, who had started families of their own, would ask her when she would get married. "When are you going to find someone, Maggie?" they would say with a knowing smile, as though they already knew the answer. Maggie would laugh it off, pretending to be okay with it, but inside, her heart broke a little more each time. She was tired of being the one who had to explain herself, tired of being the one who didn't fit in. Her mother, too, began to show signs of worry. She would bring up the subject of marriage in the quietest of moments, her voice soft and gentle, as if she were treading on fragile ground. "Maggie, I just want you to be happy," she would say, her eyes filled with concern. "You know, it's not too late to try again with someone else. Maybe the right person just hasn't come along yet." Maggie could see the worry etched on her mother's face. She knew her mother wanted what was best for her, but Maggie felt trapped. She wanted to make her mother happy, but she didn't want to settle for someone who couldn't see her as more than just a potential mother. She didn't want a life built on expectations, but on real love, real connection. As the days wore on, Maggie began to feel the pressure mounting. She started to question herself. Was she truly broken? Was there something wrong with her that made it impossible for people to see her as worthy of love? Why was it so hard for anyone to love her for who she was, and not just for what she could give? Then, one afternoon, a conversation at the local market changed everything. Maggie had gone to buy some bread and vegetables, the same routine she had followed countless times. As she stood in line, waiting to pay, she overheard a conversation between two older women from town. They were gossiping, as they often did, about the younger people in the town. Maggie couldn't help but overhear their words. "You know," one woman said, "I heard Maggie's still not married. Poor thing, they keep saying she's fertile, but no one believes it. No man wants her, it's a shame. She's such a sweet girl, but she just doesn't fit in here." The words cut through Maggie like a knife. She stood frozen, not knowing what to do. The women didn't see her, but their words reached her. They confirmed everything she had been feeling, that she was nothing more than a product to be judged, a woman whose value was determined by her ability to bear children. Maggie didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she stood tall, her heart heavy with the weight of their words. She didn't know how long she stood there, but eventually she paid for her groceries and left the store, walking out into the bright sunlight. The world around her felt a little more distant now, as if she had stepped into another world. A world where she didn't belong. But even in that moment of despair, Maggie felt something stir inside her. She couldn't let those women define her. She couldn't let the town's expectations control her life. There had to be something more. She wasn't a woman to be discarded so easily. She refused to let the judgment of others determine her worth. As she walked home that day, something changed in Maggie. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of clarity. She was more than just a woman who could or couldn't bear children. She was more than the town's whispers. She was worthy of love. And no matter how long it took, she was determined to find it. Maggie had always been someone who valued independence, but the way people viewed her made it hard for her to hold on to that sense of self. Her quiet town had a way of defining everyone. For the women, their worth was tied to whether they could marry and raise a family. It didn't matter if they had dreams, ambitions, or talents beyond the home. If they were fertile and could carry a child, that was enough. And for years, Maggie had felt the sting of being left out of that equation. No matter how hard she tried to fit into the mold they set for her, she never could. And yet, something inside her refused to believe that this was her fate. She couldn't let herself settle for a life of quiet acceptance, a life defined by what others thought of her. As the days passed and the whispers continued, Maggie found herself wondering if there was something more. If there was someone out there who could see her for who she truly was. She had stopped believing that anyone from her town could. They were too fixated on their own traditions, too set in their ways to see anything beyond the superficial. But perhaps there was someone beyond the small boundaries of her world who would understand her. Then, one afternoon, while walking through the local market, something unexpected happened. Maggie had just picked up some fresh vegetables when she heard a voice from behind her. It was deep, confident, and carried with it an air of familiarity, though Maggie couldn't place it. Turning around, she saw a man standing there, looking at her with a curious expression. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a look of someone who had spent his life working outdoors. He wore a simple cowboy hat, his clothes a little dusty from the day's work, but there was a kind smile on his face that made her pause. For a moment, Maggie felt a little uneasy, wondering if he had recognized her from the whispers that followed her everywhere. But then he spoke. "You're Maggie, right?" he asked. She nodded slowly, unsure of where this was going. "Yes, I am," she replied, her voice a little unsure. "I've heard a lot about you," he said with a smile which only made Maggie feel more awkward. "I'm Jack," he added. "I've just moved into the area and I'm trying to get to know people." Maggie wasn't sure how to respond. People from town had heard about her, but not in the way Jack seemed to be speaking. They usually talked about her as a disappointment, a woman who couldn't give them what they expected. But Jack didn't seem to be looking at her that way. It was as if he didn't know the rumors, the judgment, the whispers. I don't know if I'm the best person to get to know," Maggie said, her words coming out more bluntly than she intended. She felt an old habit rising up inside her, pushing people away before they could get too close. But Jack didn't take offense. Instead, he chuckled softly, a sound that made Maggie's heart flutter unexpectedly. "I don't know what you've heard, Maggie, but I'm not here to judge you. I just thought I'd say hello," he said. "It's rare to meet someone with such a kind look in their eyes." Maggie was taken aback by his words, a kind look in her eyes. She wasn't used to being seen that way. She was used to being seen as something less, something incomplete. But here was a man who, for reasons she couldn't understand, was looking at her differently. He was smiling, and there was no judgment in his gaze. "You're not like the others around here, are you?" Maggie asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Jack shook his head, taking off his cowboy hat and running a hand through his hair. "I guess you could say I'm from a different place," he said. "I don't know much about how things work around here, but I do know this. People are more than the labels they wear." Maggie felt a spark of something inside her at those words. He didn't see her as just a woman who didn't fit in, or a woman who couldn't bear children. He saw her as someone who had value in her own right, someone worthy of respect. It was a small thing, just a few words, but it was more than she had heard in years. For the first time in a long time, Maggie felt a little less invisible. As they continued talking, Maggie found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected. Jack asked about her life, her interests, what she enjoyed doing when she wasn't working or taking care of things around the house. And for the first time in a long time, Maggie realized that she had interests. Things she enjoyed, things that made her feel alive, even though she had almost forgotten about them. She loved to read, to write stories, to dream about places far away from the small town that had tried to define her. But for so long, she had hidden those parts of herself, afraid that they weren't enough. But Jack didn't ask her to change. He didn't judge her for her dreams or the things that made her unique. He simply listened. "I don't know what people have told you," Jack said, "but I believe there's a lot more to you than anyone around here knows. You've got a lot of heart, Maggie, and that's something you don't see every day." Maggie felt her cheeks warm at his words, unsure of how to respond. She had spent so much time thinking that no one would ever see her for who she truly was, that hearing those words was almost too much to take in. She wasn't used to being complimented, not like this. And it felt good. It felt real. "Thank you," she said quietly, not sure what else to say. "You're very kind." "I just speak the truth," Jack said with a smile. "Maybe I'm new around here, but I know when someone's worth getting to know." For a moment, Maggie just stood there looking at him. There was something about Jack that made her feel like she could breathe again. Something about him that made her believe in the possibility of something better. She had spent so much time feeling trapped by other people's expectations, by their judgments, that the idea of someone looking at her without those biases felt almost too good to be true. Jack's visit to the market became the first of many visits, each one leaving Maggie with a growing sense of hope. It wasn't just his kindness that she appreciated, but the way he saw her. He didn't see the woman the town had cast aside. He didn't see the woman who couldn't meet their expectations. He saw Maggie as a person with her own dreams and desires, and that made all the difference. As the days passed, Jack and Maggie spent more time together. They talked about their lives, their hopes, and their struggles. And with each conversation, Maggie began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. It wasn't with the town or its expectations, but with Jack. She had never imagined that someone could come into her life and make her feel like she mattered, like she was enough just as she was. For the first time in ages, Maggie allowed herself to believe that perhaps she could have more than what the world had tried to give her. Perhaps, with Jack's kindness, she could find her way out of the shadows and into a life where she was valued for who she was, not for what others thought she should be. The possibility of that was something Maggie had never dared to dream of before, but with Jack, it felt real. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to let herself believe it. As the days went by, Maggie found herself thinking more and more about Jack. Their conversations had become something she looked forward to every day. No longer did she feel like she was walking through life alone, weighed down by the expectations of others. With Jack, there was no pressure to be something she was. She could simply be herself, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. They spent more time together. Sometimes they would sit by the river, watching the water flow by and talk for hours. Jack would tell Maggie stories about the places he had been, the people he had met, and the adventures he had experienced. Maggie loved hearing these stories. They painted a picture of a world outside the small town that she had spent her entire life in, a world full of possibilities. Jack never treated her like she was someone to be fixed or changed. He treated her like an equal, someone with her own story to tell. For Maggie, it was a refreshing change. She was used to being seen as a problem to be solved, a woman who needed to conform to the expectations of others. But Jack didn't care about those expectations. He didn't see her as someone who needed to fit into a box. Instead, he saw her as someone who had a voice, someone who had something valuable to offer. As their friendship deepened, Maggie began to open up to Jack in ways she had never done with anyone before. She told him about the pain of growing up in a town where her worth was measured by her ability to bear children. She shared how, for years, she had felt like she was invisible, like no one saw her for who she truly was. But with Jack, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, heard, and valued. Jack listened to her with empathy and understanding. He never interrupted or tried to fix her problems. Instead, he simply let her talk, offering quiet support with a reassuring smile or a gentle word when she needed it. Maggie felt a sense of relief every time she spoke with him. It was as if the weight of all the years of judgment and rejection was slowly lifting off her shoulders. She realized that, for the first time, she didn't have to pretend to be someone else. She didn't have to wear a mask, she could just be Maggie. Jack, too, began to open up to Maggie. He shared stories from his past, his childhood growing up on a ranch, his travels to different parts of the country, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Maggie learned that Jack had faced his own share of struggles. He wasn't just some carefree cowboy. He had worked hard to get where he was, and his life hadn't always been easy. But through it all, he had remained kind, strong, and resilient. Maggie admired him for that. She had never met anyone like him before, someone who saw the world with such openness and who lived with such integrity. One evening, as the sun was setting and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, Maggie and Jack sat on a blanket by the river. The air was warm, and the sound of the water gently flowing nearby was soothing. Jack looked at Maggie with a smile, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. "Maggie, I've been thinking," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I don't know what's going on between us, but I just know that I enjoy spending time with you. You make me feel at peace, like I can be myself, and that's something rare." Maggie felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had been afraid that she was getting too close to him, afraid that he would one day look at her the same way the others had, like she was something to be discarded. But Jack's words were different. He wasn't just saying them out of politeness. There was sincerity in his voice, and that made her heart swell with hope. "I feel the same way," Maggie replied softly. "I don't know why, but when I'm with you, I feel like I can finally be myself. For so long, I've felt like I had to be someone I'm not just to fit in. But with you, it's different." Jack smiled, reaching over to gently take her hand. It felt like a simple gesture, but to Maggie it meant the world. No one had ever held her hand with such tenderness before. It wasn't about anything other than the fact that they were there together, in that moment, sharing something real. "Then maybe we should stop worrying about what everyone else thinks," Jack said, his thumb brushing over the back of her hand. "Maybe we should just focus on what makes us happy. Who cares what anyone else says?" Maggie nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. For so long, she had worried about the opinions of others, about fitting into the mold that society had created for her. But sitting there with Jack, she realized that those worries didn't matter as much as she had thought. What mattered was how she felt in the moment, how she felt with him. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. "I don't know if I'm ready for everything to change yet," Maggie said, her voice a little hesitant. "But I do know that I want to see where this goes. I want to see what we can be together." Jack squeezed her hand gently, his eyes soft and understanding. "We'll take it slow," he said. "No pressure, let's just enjoy each moment and see where it leads." Maggie smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time she didn't feel afraid of it. She felt hopeful. She felt like there was a chance for something more, something real, and that was all she needed. As the days turned into weeks, Maggie and Jack's bond only grew stronger. They continued to spend time together, going on long walks, talking about their hopes and dreams, and enjoying each other's company. Maggie found herself laughing more than she had in years. She felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. With Jack by her side, she felt like she was finally starting to live her life for herself, not for anyone else's expectations. The town, however, was beginning to take notice of their growing friendship. Maggie had always been the subject of gossip, but now, with Jack in the picture, the whispers grew louder. People began to talk about her again, but this time it wasn't just pity. They were curious. They wondered what was going on between her and the mysterious cowboy who had come to town. They didn't understand why Jack, someone who seemed to have it all together, would be interested in Maggie, someone who had been written off by so many. But Maggie didn't care. She had learned that it didn't matter what anyone else thought. What mattered was that she had found someone who saw her for who she truly was. Someone who valued her for her heart, not for what she could give or what society expected of her. As time went on, Maggie's connection with Jack deepened. It wasn't just about companionship anymore. It was about respect, trust, and the freedom to be themselves. And with every passing day, Maggie realized that she had finally found what she had been looking for all along. A love that was real, unconditional, and entirely her own. Maggie had never expected her life to take the turn it had. As the days passed, the connection she had with Jack only grew deeper, and she started to see a future that she had never allowed herself to imagine before. For so long, she had convinced herself that she wasn't worthy of love, that the expectations of the town and its narrow views would always keep her locked in a cage of judgment. But Jack had shown her a different way. With every conversation, every shared moment, he had proved that there was more to life than what others thought of her. It wasn't just the way he made her feel, like she was important, like she had value beyond the expectations placed upon her. It was the way he made her feel alive again, like the dreams she had put on hold for so many years could actually come true. Jack had brought a new sense of possibility into her world, and for the first time, Maggie allowed herself to believe in it. One day, while sitting on the porch of her small house, Maggie was staring out at the fields when Jack walked up to her. His boots made a soft sound as he approached, the kind of sound that was familiar, comforting. Maggie turned to see him standing there, his smile warm as always. "Hey there," he said, his voice easygoing and full of warmth. "What are you thinking about?" Maggie looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. It was moments like this that made her realize how much Jack had come to mean to her. He wasn't just a man who had come into her life to fill the gaps. He had become someone she could trust, someone who believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. "I'm thinking about how much my life has changed since I met you," she replied, her voice soft but full of sincerity. Jack's smile widened, and he sat down beside her on the porch, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I'm glad I could be part of that change," he said, his voice steady and full of affection. "But you did all the hard work. You took the first step towards seeing yourself differently. All I did was remind you of what you already had inside you." Maggie felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. She didn't want to cry, not now, not with him sitting beside her. But Jack, always perceptive, noticed and gently reached out to touch her hand. "Hey," he said, his voice gentle. "It's okay to let it out. You've been through a lot. I know it's not always easy to believe that you're worth more than what people say about you." Maggie let out a small laugh, the sound of it a mixture of relief and sadness. "I never thought anyone would see me like you do," she said quietly, her eyes locked on the horizon. "For so long, I've felt like I was nothing, like I was just a woman to be judged based on what I could give, not who I really was. And then you came along and everything felt different." Jack squeezed her hand gently, his eyes soft and understanding. "You've always been someone worth loving, Maggie," he said, his voice full of honesty. "It's just that sometimes it takes the right person to see it. I'm glad that I could be the one to show you that." Maggie felt a rush of emotions in her chest: gratitude, love, and an overwhelming sense of relief. She had spent so many years feeling broken, feeling like she wasn't enough. But Jack had opened her eyes to something she had almost forgotten. She was worth more than the opinions of others, more than the labels society had tried to place on her. She was worth something just because she was herself. Their relationship had been a slow, steady journey, but now, sitting there with him, Maggie realized just how far they had come. It wasn't just about the romantic moments they shared, or the tender gestures that had become part of their everyday routine. It was about the trust they had built, the way they had both opened up to each other, allowing themselves to be vulnerable in a way neither of them had expected. They had built something real, something that was founded on understanding, not expectations. But there was still one thing that Maggie had been holding on to, something that had been weighing on her heart. She had spent so many years wondering if she was truly capable of giving anyone what they wanted, what they expected from her. She had spent so much time feeling like a failure that she had never allowed herself to fully embrace the idea of motherhood, or what it might mean to her. Jack must have sensed her hesitation because, without saying a word, he leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. It was a gentle kiss, full of tenderness and understanding. "Maggie," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know what you're thinking, but listen to me, you don't owe anyone an explanation, you don't have to be anything other than who you are. And whatever we decide to do in the future, it will be because we both want it, not because anyone expects it from us." Maggie looked at him, her heart full of gratitude for his words. She had been so afraid of disappointing him, of letting him down, but Jack's words made her realize that what mattered most was the bond they shared, not the external pressures that had once felt so suffocating. She reached out and kissed him, her lips soft against his. It was a simple kiss, but in that moment it felt like everything had shifted. She wasn't defined by what the town expected from her. She wasn't defined by what anyone else thought. She was Maggie, and that was enough. The next few weeks were filled with more quiet moments of connection, long walks through the fields, shared dinners, and lazy afternoons spent reading together. The town continued to talk, of course. They couldn't help themselves. But for Maggie, their words no longer held any power. They could talk all they wanted, but she had found something more important than their judgment. She had found love, acceptance, and most importantly, herself. And then, one evening, as they were sitting by the fire pit in Jack's backyard, something unexpected happened. Jack looked at Maggie with a serious expression, his eyes soft but filled with a quiet intensity. "Maggie, I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but full of meaning. "I know we've talked about taking things slow, and I'm not trying to rush you or anything, but I want you to know that I'm serious about us. I want to build a life with you, a life that's ours without the weight of what everyone else thinks. I want to be with you no matter what the future holds." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this, but at the same time, it felt like the natural next step. She had spent so much time doubting herself, wondering if anyone would ever truly want her. But here was Jack, offering her something she had never allowed herself to believe in, a future with him. "I want that too, Jack," she replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I want to be with you, and I want to see what the future holds for us. I don't know what it looks like, but with you I know I can face anything." Jack smiled, his eyes filled with love and affection. "Then let's build that future together, Maggie. No more doubts, no more fears, just us." In that moment, Maggie realized that everything had changed. She was no longer defined by the opinions of others, by the limitations they had placed on her. She was free to be herself, to build a life with someone who loved her for who she was, not for what they thought she could give. And with Jack by her side, she felt ready to face whatever the future might hold. The journey had been long and full of challenges, but now she knew she wasn't alone. She had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her not just for what she could offer, but for everything she was. As the seasons changed, so did Maggie's life. The warmth of spring gave way to the cool breeze of fall, and with it, Maggie felt a sense of calm that she had never known before. She had spent so many years running from herself, from the town's expectations, and from the weight of what others thought. But now, sitting beside Jack, she felt like she was finally living her life. Not the life others had planned for her, but the life she had chosen for herself. Maggie and Jack's relationship had continued to grow stronger with every passing day. It wasn't just the small moments they shared, though those moments, like their walks in the evening or the quiet times they spent reading by the fire, meant the world to her. It was the way they supported each other. Jack had shown Maggie what it meant to be loved without conditions, and Maggie had shown Jack what it meant to be understood without judgment. There were still whispers from the town, of course. The people in the small town couldn't help but gossip about what they didn't understand. They questioned why Jack, a man with his own life, his own dreams, would choose to be with Maggie, the woman who had been written off so many times before. But Maggie didn't care anymore. Their words no longer held power over her, not when she had found something so much more valuable, real love and respect. She had stopped worrying about the opinions of others. For the first time in years, she felt free, free to be who she truly was. Free to make choices that were her own, without the weight of society's judgment pressing down on her every move. One evening, after a long day of working together on the farm, Maggie and Jack were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, the kind of beauty that made Maggie feel like she was part of something much bigger than herself. Jack was quiet for a moment, and Maggie, sensing he had something important to say, turned her attention to him. "Maggie," Jack began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about us. And I know we've had our share of challenges, but I want you to know something. You are the most important person in my life, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to hearing such strong words, especially not from someone who had already shown her so much kindness and love. Jack had never pressured her, never tried to force her into any mold. He had simply accepted her as she was, and that was more than she had ever expected from anyone. "Jack," Maggie replied, her voice trembling slightly, "I don't know if I ever truly believed I was worthy of a love like this. For so long I thought I had to be something else, something I wasn't just to fit in. But with you, I've learned to see myself differently. You've shown me that I'm enough just as I am." Jack reached over and took her hand in his. "You've always been enough, Maggie. You just needed to see it yourself. I've never seen anyone with a heart as big as yours, and that's what matters most. Not what others think, not what the town says. It's who you are that makes you so special." Maggie looked down at their hands, their fingers intertwined. For the first time, she felt truly accepted, accepted by Jack and, more importantly, by herself. She no longer felt the need to prove her worth to anyone. She was enough, and she always had been. "I've been thinking about that too," Maggie said, her voice full of emotion. "About the future, about us. And for the first time, I don't feel afraid of what might come. I know there will be challenges, but I also know that we'll face them together." Jack smiled, the expression on his face full of warmth. "I've always believed that when two people care for each other like we do, there's nothing they can't face. We'll make it through, Maggie, together." Maggie felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mixture of love, relief, and joy. She had spent so many years feeling lost, trying to live up to expectations that were never hers to meet. But now, with Jack by her side, she knew she had found something real, something worth holding on to. As they sat together in the fading light, Maggie felt a deep sense of peace. She had found a love that wasn't based on what she could give, but on who she was. She had found a partner who saw her as she truly was, kind, strong, and worthy of love, even when the world had tried to tell her otherwise. The days that followed were filled with more of the simple joys that Maggie had once thought were beyond her reach. She and Jack continued to work together, building a life that was uniquely their own. They didn't worry about the opinions of others anymore. They focused on what made them happy, what made them feel whole. And in doing so, they created a life that was built on love, trust, and mutual respect. Maggie started to realize that her worth wasn't defined by what the town thought of her, or by whether or not she could live up to the expectations placed on her. Her worth was defined by the love she shared with Jack, by the way they cared for each other and supported each other through thick and thin. As time went on, Maggie found herself dreaming again, dreaming of a future that was full of possibilities. She didn't know exactly what that future would look like, but she knew it would be with Jack. They had already faced so much together, and their bond was stronger than ever. Whatever challenges the future might bring, Maggie knew they would face them side by side, just as they always had. One day, after months of working hard and saving every penny, Jack and Maggie sat down together and talked about taking the next step. They had built something beautiful together, and now they were ready to make it official. Jack took Maggie's hand, his eyes full of love and commitment. "Maggie," he said softly, "I know we've been through a lot and we've already built so much together. But I want to make it official. I want you to be my partner for life. Will you marry me?" Maggie's heart skipped a beat as she looked into Jack's eyes. She had never imagined this moment would come, but now that it had, she knew she wanted nothing more than to say yes. "Yes," she replied, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." In that moment, Maggie knew that everything had changed. She had gone from feeling like an invisible woman to finding the love and acceptance she had always longed for. And now she was ready to build the life she had dreamed of, a life with Jack by her side. As they embraced, the town's whispers no longer mattered. Maggie had found something much more valuable than the approval of others. She had found love, true, unconditional love, and with it she had found herself. She was no longer the woman who had been judged and rejected. She was the woman who had been loved for who she truly was, and that was all she needed.